Peace, love, and balance. The Gnostic Dread here. This is the start of a new series I will be doing called A Practical Understanding of the Left-Hand Path, where I'll be going in depth about many of the practical aspects of the left-hand path for those who wish to understand or even walk this path. I previously wrote a short introduction article to the left-hand path, which I recommend that you read, and I'll leave a link to in the description. With this series, however, I hope to give people a better understanding of what it actually means to follow the left-hand path in practice, and shed light on some misconceptions people have about this school of thought. One of the major misconceptions about the left-hand path is those who follow it are either immoral, undisciplined, or outright wicked. This is in part due to what is usually deemed as dark aesthetics and symbolism being used by many who follow the left-hand path, which is something that will be briefly addressed later. More directly to the point of why this misconception exists, though, is due to the rejection of what the right-hand path considers morally right or correct. Because of this, I think focusing on how the left-hand path approaches morality is the best place to start. To start, the definition of morality, according to the American Heritage Dictionary, is a system or collection of ideas of right and wrong conduct. In the eyes of the right-hand path, which, let me be clear, when I mention the right-hand path, I am speaking about the church, the state, and even mainstream collective society. In their eyes, moral conduct is about self-sacrifice, obedience, and collectivism, all things which the follower of the left-hand path rejects. But because they reject these ideas of morality, does that mean they reject morality entirely? Not at all. For to reject morality makes you no different than a sociopath or criminal. It's not morality that the left-hand path follower rejects. It's authority in favor of individual sovereignty. Fellow left-hand path writer Stephen Flowers, who authored the book Lords of the Left-Hand Path, writes that a true follower of the left-hand path is defined by the criteria of self-deification and antinomianism. And for those who don't know, antinomianism is defined as any view which rejects laws or legalism and argues against moral, religious, or social norms, or is at least considered to do so. And this is where the misconception about the morality of the left-hand path, or the assumed lack thereof, comes into play. Because antinomianism in part defines a follower of the left-hand path, it's assumed that all this path is about is going against the grain, being dark and rebellious. Images of teenage goths wearing all black, upside-down pentagrams and screaming, "F authority," probably spring to mind. The problem with trying to define the morality of the left-hand path through this way is the fact that times and societies change. What may have been a rebellious act yesterday may be mainstream and accepted today. Morals, however, should be concrete and unchanging. The very nature of antinomianism is that it's always a reaction to a certain movement or trend and thus dictated by the opposition, which in turn is a contradiction of free will and individualism, the core of what the left-hand path is really about. This is why groups like the Satanic Temple, for example, are nothing more than liberal political youth movements that really have nothing to do with what the left-hand path truly entails. Sure, they may practice a form of antinomianism with their use of dark imagery, but the more they are examined, the more it becomes painfully obvious that their reason for existing is only to support their preference for dark aesthetic, personal fetishes, and to propagate their own political position. They completely lack and possibly are even completely unaware of the other more important criterion that defines a left-hand path follower, self-deification. Antinomianism helps us understand the dark aesthetic of the left-hand path, but within the criterion of self-deification, we find the moral stance of one who follows the left-hand path. Going back to Stephen Flowers' book, Lords of the Left-Hand Path, he further breaks down self-deification into 4 components, those components being self-deification itself, individualism, initiation, and magic. It is here that we find the unchanging moral code of the left-hand path. Contrasting this to the other side would be as follows. Self-deification is good, while self-sublimation, or rather dissolving the self, is bad. Individualism is good, while collectivism is bad. Initiation is good, initiation essentially being self-evolution, while stagnation is bad. Magic is good, which in this sense magic simply being causing change to occur in conformity to your will, while obedience or slavery is bad. One could actually make the argument that individualism is in fact the most important component of the left-hand path morality, as the other three are dependent upon it. This can best be seen when directly examining the dichotomy of individualism versus collectivism. Some have gone out of their way to suggest that individualism isn't practical as we have to work with others daily, exchange ideas, and the like. However, it is important to remember and understand that cooperation is not the same as collectivism. Cooperation is voluntary, while collectivism is coercion and involuntary. Think of Anakin saying, "If you're not with me, then you're my enemy." Others even go as far as to suggest that a central authority is necessary to balance the needs of the many with the needs of the few to ensure equality and fairness. An example of this is the state taking a position that it is somehow bad that one person is doing better than the other and that we all need to be equal. Not only is it wrong to think that we are all equal, we're not, something I've written about in my article Equality is a Lie, but also such a position of the state is nothing more than an excuse for the state to add more taxation and regulations. It's not some new idea that there needs to be a central authority for our own good. Kings and priests have pushed this idea all throughout history. Free individuals and free markets are actually the radical new idea. In the modern era, the state has simply replaced the church, with status replacing the role of religious zealots. I've also documented examples of this happening throughout history in my article, Deification of the State. The same message of collectivism is still propagated regardless. Obey and conform. Let us make the important decisions for you. We know what's best. Many may think that taking a position of individualism means one lacks compassion and that it makes one a selfish narcissist. However, free individuals are free to exchange with others as much or as little as they desire. When done so voluntarily, it is not collectivism. It is actually collectivists, i.e. socialists and totalitarians, who twist compassion to make blind, obedient followers who are willing to harm or kill out of an irrational sense of nationalism or love for one's ethnicity, and so on. For the left-hand path follower, however, their compassion develops freely and in return develops them. Going back to the idea of cooperation, when free individuals exchange value and goods voluntarily, this drives a productive society in which the individuals thrive. However, again, it is in fact the collectivists, i.e. the socialists and totalitarians, who seek to control and prohibit free cooperation through regulations and taxation. Engaging in communication with others does not equate to collectivism or suggest that one is a part of a collective. Remember, individualism is not being cut off from others or external influences. It's about having the individual freedom to engage with others as much or as little as one desires. When it comes to communication, it is always the collectivists, i.e. the socialists and totalitarians, who seek to coerce and control communication through propaganda, censorship, and political correctness. There's no greater example of this in modern times than the cancel culture that plagues social media. These points are important to grasp and understand as a moral defense against the religious mainstream and status. If your response in a moral debate is always, everything is relative, you'll never win the argument. If you can point out the immorality of coercion and dissolving of the individual self, you can stand your ground not only in a debate, but also within your own mind. To know this within your own mind gives you the security of knowing that you have the moral high ground. And the left-hand path is indeed without a doubt the moral high ground, as every thought and action is voluntary, whereas even when it appears that the right-hand path is trying to do some apparent good, they cannot do so without some form of coercion or control. I'll start to close by saying that it is completely normal and natural for a follower of the left-hand path to still have compassion and sympathy for others and even still desire companionship. Again, it's a misconception or an outright lie to think otherwise. Following the left-hand path and adhering to individualism does not negate these innate human traits. In reality, the left-hand path makes our compassion and love deeper and more authentic, as it is not being coerced or performed out of any expectations. I show compassion and love because that's what I want or will to do. The idea that we are outgrowing individuality and growing into a collective mind is the right-hand path's wet dream, and such a thought began to be propagated in modern times by none other than the likes of Karl Marx. By now, it should be obvious and go without saying that the left-hand path is something separate and in fact incompatible with what many see as traditional left politics. So again, when you see these so-called satanic groups siding with and even pushing for leftist policies in politics, understand that despite their embracing of the dark aesthetic associated with Satanism and the left-hand path, they truly have nothing to do with what it means to actually walk along this path and achieve apotheosis or self-deification. They really just boil down to being leftists and socialists using the imagery as shock value to push their own propaganda and agendas. And that brings us to the end of this video. If you haven't guessed it already, Part 2 will be a deeper dive into how to view the different political and economic systems within a practical left-hand path following mindset. If you enjoyed this video, I ask that you hit the like button, the dislike button if you didn't, and make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that little bell icon so that you can be notified whenever a new video is uploaded. I also have links to the articles mentioned in this video, as well as a link to my official Discord, Roz Ketchum, in the description below. Make sure to go and check those out as well. Thanks for watching. Peace, love, and balance.